In the late 1970s, a scientist drags her body through the jungles of Zaire. She's been trying to study and understand a plant known as Triffid, which is quite dangerous. The woman can't escape their fury and dies in the jungle, but she manages to warn her son so he can get away. 30 years later in 2009, the Triffids are being kept in labs away from cities to be used for their oil, which is an alternative to fossil fuel and has put an end to global warming. Oil companies are keeping citizens in the dark about this because of how dangerous these plants are, not only because they can feed on people, but also because they have venomous branches that can blind a person. All labs keep extra security measures not to leave any Triffid unattended, and when scientists have to come closer for studies, they wear eye protection and come with a guard that keeps the vines back with tasers. One of these many scientists is Bill, the son of the woman that died in the jungle. He wants to finish his mother's work because he also believes Triffids are smarter than they look and the noises they make are actually communication, so he keeps plenty of recordings of them. He also suffers from constant nightmares that showed him blurry memories of the night his mother died and included weird images of natives from the jungle approaching him with a mask. One afternoon, while Bill is making more recordings under guard Lucy's protection, they discover that an anti-Triffid activist Walter has sneaked inside the lab because he wants to reveal the truth to the whole world. Walter knocks Lucy out by surprising her from behind and makes her lose her goggles, so Bill comes closer to give her his own. He also uses the chance to take her taser and stun Walter, but the sudden movement gets the Triffid's attention and Bill ends up with venom on his eyes. As the other guards finally arrive to arrest Walter, Lucy grabs Bill and drags him to the local hospital, where the doctor gives him an anti-venom after bandaging Bill's eyes. He has a 50-50 chance to become blind, but they need to wait 24 hours to be sure. Meanwhile, people around the world are getting ready to watch a meteor shower. Radio reporter Joe interviews an astrophysicist who explains the sun will release a vast explosion of gas and nuclear fire that will look like fireworks in the sky, but it can't cause any damage to humans. However, when the show finally starts a few hours later, the solar eruption flashes such a bright light all over the world that causes all technology to lose signal and the people watching to feel a burning sensation in their eyes. Because Bill spends the night sleeping with his eyes bandaged, he has no idea of what's going on. When he wakes up a few hours later, he goes to the bathroom and removes the bandages to discover his eyes are just fine, but after leaving his room, he also discovers everyone around him is panicking. He looks for the doctor and finally learns what happened from him. The solar eruption left most of the population blind. Bill decides to quickly leave to go back to the labs, afraid of what is happening to the plants without supervision, and finds the city has succumbed to utter chaos. In the Triffid labs, Walter notices the lights in the sky being stronger than they should be, and he covers his face with his hood to protect his face. Everyone else in the lab including Lucy loses their eyesight, so Walter takes advantage of this to escape his cell and free the Triffids. In a plane that is flying over the city, Torrance doesn't care about the meteor shower and is sleeping through it with an eye mask on, meaning he doesn't wake up until he hears everyone panicking. The plane's going down because the pilots can't see either, but Torrance ignores all the cries for help and hides in the bathroom with a bunch of life jackets. When the plane crashes, Torrance is the only survivor and he immediately begins taking advantage of the chaos in the city to rob stores. Meanwhile, Jo wakes up with her eyesight intact because she's been underground in a subway station, which is now in ruins because of the plane crash. When she goes outside, she bumps into a mother with a kid and they realize she can see, so they begin begging for her help. Soon lots of people are surrounding Jo, trying to drag her away for their own protection, prompting Jo to get in a car and try to drive away. Unfortunately, the street is blocked by the blind crowd, allowing a cop to approach Jo and try to arrest her under some flimsy excuse to take her away. At that moment, Bill shows up looking for an authority figure and notices what's going on, so he takes advantage of the cop's blindness to take the gun from him and rescue Jo. Then the two of them run away by keeping quiet in order for the blind people not to notice them. After walking for many hours, Jo and Bill manage to reach Whitehall, but a crowd of blind people is blocking the entrance. They go through it to try to reach the guards, but communicating with them is useless because they only answer with shots. With no authority to talk to for help, Bill decides to go to the labs himself, and Jo goes with him not to be alone. The pair steals a car to reach the lab, where they discover the Triffids have escaped and everyone is dead, including Lucy and Walter. Bill retrieves all his research because he thinks it may come in handy later, then he accepts to take Jo to her father's house so she can check on him. Sadly, by the time they make it there it's too late. The man is already dead and being taken away by the Triffids. Jo refuses to believe it and tries to shoot the plant, but this only makes the Triffid angrier and Bill has to drag Jo away before they get surrounded. Now that Jo has seen how dangerous these plants can be, she decides she wants to warn people, so the pair returns to London to use the emergency broadcast from the BBC. Jo has a quick interview with Bill to finally let the world know about the Triffids, warning them that they'll be searching for food and that means these plants will most likely be coming to the cities. Afterward, they take a break to eat something, and Bill tells Jo about his childhood. His father Dr. Mason was the one that discovered that genetically modifying the Triffids could give them the solution to the energy crisis, but his mother hadn't agreed with his work. She obviously died that day in the jungle, but Bill hasn't seen his father since. Meanwhile, Torrance sneaks into the Prime Minister's home only to find his now blind secretary Hilda. He spends the night there, and in the morning, Hilda plays for Torrance the emergency broadcast, which confirms there aren't any authorities left. Torrance wants to take advantage of this to take power for himself, and he leaves while dragging Hilda with him. Sometime later, Bill sees flares signals coming from across the city, which must indicate a group of people that can see must have formed a community and is letting others know where to find them. On their way there, they come across Torrance, who is taking weapons from a military van that was attacked by a Triffid. He offers to team up because supposedly he's alone when actually Hilda is in the car, but Joe and Bill turn him down. Moments later, they make it to the building that sent the flares and discover they don't allow blind people to enter. Joe and Bill are allowed inside and received by some employees of the home office, who explain they have their own generator here. Bill warns them about the Triffids, but since the plants are easy to avoid if you can see, the community leaders would rather concentrate on gathering supplies and finding a place where they can escape to. They have no intention of bringing the blind with them because they can't be taken care of, which Joe considers to be completely immoral and makes her not want to work with them. Bill's trying to leave to find his father and work on a way to stop the Triffids, but he isn't sure it's a good idea for Joe to come with him. In the meantime, Major Coker is leading a group of sighted people to help the blind that are being ignored by home office. Torrance finds them and joins the group pretending he wants to help too, buying his way in by sharing all the weapons he's gathered. Coker and his men don't waste time and enter the building through the parking lot, knocking everyone out with tear gas and smoke grenades. Everyone that can see is taken away, including Bill and Joe. Moments later, Coker handcuffs every sighted person to a blind one for survival. Bill ends up with an old mechanic and Joe ends up with Hilda. Bill thinks Coker's heart is in the right place, but it was dumb of him to ignore the Triffid threat just because they're armed. Next, the group is taken to London to search for supplies. The first few houses they search are empty, and when they stop to take a break, Torrance lies and tells Joe that Coker would love for her to start a new broadcast to gather people for their cause, but she turns him down, not approving of these methods. Afterward, the group finds a supermarket warehouse with plenty of food for them to take. It's easy for them to get inside, but that's because the guards are already dead. The Triffids got there first. Joe is grabbed by one of them, and Bill manages to save her by using a lighter and a spray to light the plant on fire. Unfortunately, they still lose a few people in the other corridors, including Hilda, because the guard Torrance had assigned runs away like a coward. Coker finally takes the Triffids seriously and uncuffs the people left, thus when Torrance arrives, Coker demands to have more weapons to fight the Triffids and Bill as his right hand. Torrance obviously doesn't like it, but for now he accepts to play along. When they return to London, Joe sees Coker's change of mind and accepts to do a broadcast to help before she leaves with Bill to look for his father. Torrance doesn't want her to leave, so he asks her to do a broadcast right now without any planning, and immediately people all over the city come to them to join their cause. While Joe is busy, Torrance sends his men to kidnap Bill and Coker and take them to the forest to make it look like they were attacked by Triffids while Torrance takes over the leadership of the group. After the broadcast is over, Torrance tells Joe that Bill died during an attack, giving her the things his men took from Bill's jacket as proof of his story. Meanwhile in the forest, Torrance's men make noise to get the Triffids' attention, but the plants get to them faster than expected and kill them all. With the Triffids busy attacking the soldiers, Bill and Coker get to escape and gain control of the truck, although Coker's eyes get sprayed with venom on their way out and Bill loses his tape recorder when he uses it to distract the Triffids with their own noises. When eventually the truck runs out of gas, the pair begins looking for shelter on foot. The next day in London, Joe continues to make broadcasts to call people over from all over the country, and Torrance asks Joe out for dinner, saying they still need a happy moment in dark times, but Joe turns him down. Later, Joe notices people are building a wall around the area to keep the Triffids out and is starting to get suspicious of how much attention everyone pays to Torrance's orders when this should be Coker's operation. Since Coker hasn't been around for a while, Joe approaches a young fighter named Troy to ask if Bill really is dead, and Troy admits they don't have proof, just the tape recorder one of their men brought back from the forest. Furious, Joe sneaks into Torrance's office and recovers the recorder to put it safely away with the other Bill's things. Back to Bill and Coker, they finally come across a church where a religious group takes them in and helps them with their wounds. This group is led by Mother Dorrant, who doesn't turn any refugees down and explains that the building is safe from Triffids. Bill finds this suspicious because it doesn't fit Triffid behavior, but Dorrant promises this is the protection of God. Coker decides to stay with this community, but Bill leaves the church to continue looking for his father. As soon as he enters the forest behind the church though, he finds out the truth behind the so-called protection. It turns out Dorrant has been sending people, even priests and nuns, as food for the plants to eat and keep them from attacking the church. Bill immediately goes back and arrives just in time before Dorrant sends another girl away under the excuse she was chosen to build a new community somewhere else. As soon as Bill tells everyone the truth, the community kicks Dorrant out and accepts Coker as their new leader. Now Bill can leave for his father's place without worrying about them. In London, Joe tells Torrance she does want to go to dinner with him, pretending to be on his side. Later in the evening, while Torrance is getting ready for the date, Joe makes one last broadcast telling people not to come because Torrance will want them to die for him. Obviously this angers Torrance and makes him send his men after her, but Jo is already on the run with all of Bill's things in her pocket. Troy does see her hiding, but instead of snitching, he lets her get away. It's quite difficult to run through the city while dodging all the Triffids, but eventually Jo manages to find a working car and drive out of London safely. She remembers the place Bill grew up in from when he shared his story and takes the car in that direction, only to end up accidentally crashing and having to continue on foot. When she enters the forest, a truck shows up ahead of her, and no matter how fast she runs, the driver comes after her and captures her. In the meantime, Bill arrives at a town that has been abandoned after a Triffid attack. He almost gets shot by the only two survivors, who turn out to be two very young sisters called Susan and Imogen. Susan is very wary of him, but Imogen is desperate for the company of an adult and accepts to give Bill the family car as long as he accepts to take them with him. After driving a couple of hours, they come across another vehicle and the driver turns out to be Bill's father, Dr. Mason. The reunion's far from warm, but Dr. Mason doesn't hesitate to bring Bill and the girls with him to his house, which is fenced with electrocuted wires. Inside, Bill finds Jo, because it had been Dr. Mason who found her in the woods. After Jo gives Bill back all his things, the two of them finally kiss and spend the night together. Sometime later, Bill joins his father at the lab, where he's already preparing a new plan. He thinks that to stop the Triffids, they must create a new type of it that sterilizes instead of fertilizes. If they spread this new type of Triffid around, then they'll make all the others infertile and eventually the race will die out. Dr. Mason already has a female Triffid he's been working on, but to finish the experiment, he needs the pollen from a male Triffid, so Bill promises to find one. Meanwhile, Susan and Imogen are practicing target shooting and Susan gets incredibly frustrated with Imogen because she's already referring to Jo and Bill as mom and dad. Once he's properly armed, Bill drives all the way to the labs to see if at least there's one male Triffid in the area. Once again, he uses his tape recorder to play Triffid noises, but the first one to show up is Susan, who hid in the car and came along to keep an eye on him. While Bill scolds her for such a dangerous idea, a male Triffid finally shows up and grabs Susan, making it hard for Bill to shoot at it properly if he doesn't want to hit the girl too. In the end, he decides to jump on the Triffid and hit it until it dies. Bill and Susan bring the Triffid head back to the house and Dr. Mason immediately begins working on it while discussing his wife's old ideas. After Bill goes through those awful flashbacks again, Dr. Mason reveals he still has some of the things that used to belong to his wife, including her own recordings and a creepy black mask that matches Bill's flashbacks. That night, Triffids all over the country begin sporing, thus Torrance sends Troy to the lab to find Bill's file in order to find him and a solution to this problem. The next morning, a helicopter flies above the house and drops a bunch of pamphlets promoting a survivors' colony in the Isle of Wight, and the new family agrees to go there after they're done with the experiment. Dr. Mason decides to listen to his wife's old recordings to try to figure them out while feeding the Triffid, but this proves to be a mistake. The noises make the plant extra violent and it attacks the doctor through the door hatch. Bill hears all the screaming and rushes to the lab, where he turns off the tape before shooting the plant. Unfortunately, it's too late. Dr. Mason had been stung already and he dies of the venom. After giving Dr. Mason the goodbye he deserves, Bill realizes he destroyed the mutated female and there's no time for him to restart the experiment from scratch, so the family agrees to leave for the island in the morning. Things don't go as planned though, because as soon as the sun rises, Torrance shows up with his men and captures the sisters, threatening to kill them if Bill doesn't come up with a solution to deal with the Triffids in 24 hours. The family is locked up together, but no matter how much Bill thinks, there's no solution to the experiment, thus their priority must be to escape. His idea is to use the recordings to attract the Triffids and sneak out of the house while the plants attack Torrance's men. At that moment, Bill is called to see Torrance, so he gives Susan the tape recorder to hide. While Torrance taunts Bill and cruelly teases him for losing his parents, Susan climbs out of the window and leaves the recorder outside playing. When night falls, the Triffids arrive at the area, approaching the house easily because the wired fence had been turned off by Torrance. Furious about this turn of events, Torrance goes outside with his men to start shooting at the plants, but he also sends Troy to kill the family as revenge. However, when Troy makes it to the room, he can't bring himself to do it, and he shoots the air to trick Torrance into thinking the family is truly dead. Then, Troy knocks out the guy in charge of the house power switches, and when Torrance sees the plants are close enough for electrocution, he sends an order through the walkie-talkie asking for the electricity on the fence to be turned on. Troy pretends the switchers don't work and the Triffids get to attack the men. Torrance leaves his followers to die and runs back into the house, where he finds Troy escaping with the family and shoots him in the leg. Bill retaliates by tasing Torrance and knocking him out, but this delay has given time to the Triffids to surround the house and block all the exits. Hearing all the men dying triggers Bill's flashbacks and he finally remembers what the mask is for. If you pour venom into your eyes while wearing the mask, the liquid won't hurt you but it will make the plants think you're one of them. They had done that to him as a kid and that's why he got to escape while his mother couldn't. Using a Triffid branch that got broken during the fight, Bill puts the whole group through the process, and when they go outside they confirm it works. None of the plants dares to attack them. At that moment, Torrance wakes up and tries to go after them, but as soon as he comes out, the Triffids jump on him to eat him while Bill and the others run away. Sometime later, Bill, Joe, Troy, and the sisters are on a boat, making their way to the island of survivors and hoping to find enough resources to finish the experiment that will allow them to destroy the Triffids for good. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.